I want to thank you all for coming this morning to talk about the impending deadline of June 6th. And by way of doing that, I'm actually going to put it in a broader context. On January of 2010, when I came into office, I inherited an empty shell that was attached to the then existing Carousel Mall. As I said frequently and have continued to say, it was not a performing asset. My history with the Carousel Mall and the Destiny Agreement is well known. I was an advocate and prominent opponent of that agreement. Nevertheless, when I came into office, I was faced with the obligation of trying to make that a performing asset. And that obligation meant that I had to balance many things. And as I did that, I tried to balance the idea that this community needed to have a performing asset. At the same time that the community also needed to have some remuneration for what had been missed deadline after missed deadline. So in going through that process, I, along with SIDA and our negotiators, negotiated several extensions which came to about $2.5 million. As of right now, we have an expansion that is viable, and in fact the developers are saying that they're going to have an August opening for this expansion. Under the agreement that was negotiated by a previous administration, the developer had the opportunity, once phase one was completed, to call it the final phase. It is called the final phase election. Yesterday morning, the developer delivered to the chairman of SIDA a letter saying that they were going to elect to call phase one the final phase of the Destiny project. Now, I want to be very clear here what that means. What that means is the public participation in the Destiny agreement is over should SIDA do, as I fully expect them to do, to vote that Destiny is in violation of the agreement after midnight tonight. If Destiny chooses to move forward with what they have characterized as a hotel and more retail, they have every ability to do it. But they have to do it, as all other developers would do it, with their own financing and figure out how to do that. So what they have been given up by electing the final phase is they have given up future performance for SIDA bonds with what has come to be known as phase two or phase three. Essentially that means that they will no longer be able to come to SIDA for bonding for anything related to that project. Now, this is a long-term set of agreements that has been in operation for well over 10 years now. I want to correct a couple of things that have been sort of in the ether, if you will, or said directly and asked me directly. And this is very important. Because of the agreement that was struck by the previous administration and the previous Industrial Development Authority, at no time did I or did SIDA have the ability to put the existing mall on the tax rolls. At no time did we have the ability to put phase one and the existing mall on the tax rolls. The ability that we had prior to the Carousel Mall finishing phase one was, if they missed that deadline, we could put the empty expansion on the tax rolls. Now obviously that goes back to the dilemma that we had in January of 2010. Was putting an empty expansion on the tax rolls going to be a benefit for this community or for this city? I instead felt that doing the cost-benefit analysis and weighing that a viable expansion would remunerate to the benefit of this community over the long haul to get us more sales tax. Once the developer received its certificate of occupancy in December of last year, the city and SIDA had no ability to put phase one on the tax rolls. They had met their obligation under the agreement. So again, I want to be very clear about this because there is a misconception. The City of Syracuse, the Industrial Development Authority, had no ability under the agreement that was negotiated by a previous administration to put the existing mall on the tax rolls. So, what I am in essence telling you today is that the public participation element of the agreement between the city and the pyramid companies will cease to exist when SIDA votes to find them in default for failing to meet the completion deadlines as of June 6th. So with that, let me open it up to questions that you may have.
So the big question would be, where exists the pilot agreement that are on what's constructed? Are those all in place because they chose this final phase option? Can
Correct.
you describe going forward, they're just under that agreement,
Correct.
period, end?
Correct.
So are they under any kind of penalty from the city at all, or can't you impose any penalty?
We have already imposed penalties. That's what those $2.5 million were. But they had the ability to say that phase one and elect to make that their final phase, and that is what they did yesterday.
So they have the city over a barrel here?
I don't think they have the city over a barrel to the extent that this agreement was negotiated and put into place before this administration came in. This was the benefit that they negotiated.
So there will be no further expansions?
No, that's up to them. There will be no further expansions with public participation. So, if they decide that they want to move forward and build a hotel or build more retail space, then they would have to do it as every other developer would. They would have to go and get private financing.
And it would also be unlikely that they would have any kind of pilot extended to any expansion that they sought at this point.
Pilots are by definition public participation.
So I mean, what I'm saying though is that it's unlikely under your administration that you would enter a similar agreement to the previous administration.
Yes.
Were you surprised by them electing this to be the final phase?
No,
Why not?
because I understood the agreement. They understood my history with this agreement and this project is open and notorious. And I think that this agreement was put into place under my strong opposition. And now that I'm mayor, I had to really weigh a cost-benefit analysis. But I have at no point felt that the decisions and the advocacy that I made as a city councilor were inappropriate.
So just to be clear, at this point, with their election of the final phase declaration to the city, and what side it votes, it does not mean that any part of the wall goes on the tax roll, but it does mean that they can no longer come to SIDA and say we need development bonds to do future phases.
It means that under the current set of agreements, they will no longer have that ability to do that.
Do they have to make any sort of payments, pilot payments at all? They were making, I think it's $4 million this year. Does it with a 4% escalator, I believe? Does that continue, or does that go away?
That will not continue. There are payments that will continue. Again, this is a very complex set of agreements. We will continue to get approximately, I think, $3.1 million that comes off of the bonds that were issued back 2007, I believe.
Mayor, when will you keep calling it trying to get it to be a conforming asset? Obviously, you mentioned the 3.1. We've seen the 2.5 in penalties, the 4.5. When does that really become a performing asset for the city, and how?
Well, I think it becomes a performing asset in that there are tenants in that building who will, we're told, produce sales tax, and then that sales tax will inure to the benefit of this community.
So as far as payments, though, are there, when did it, I don't know, I might be re-asking the same question Rick asked, but pilot payments, or is it just that 3.1? Is that the pilot payment?
That there are lots of different payments, but the pilot payment, the interannual pilot payment, that was supposed to expire in February will expire earlier.
Question for Mr. Ryan, just in your history with this project, you as well as the mayor were an opponent of it while a member of the Common Council. You have worked with Pyramid since joining the administration, joining SIDA, to work out various agreements. Was this an open discussion? How would you term their delivery of this notice to the city? Was it expected? Were you in the midst of some kind of extension talks?
I think the short answer to that is no, Bill. There were really no extension talks. This was a decision that was pretty much made solely by the people Pyramid and delivered that information to us yesterday.
Are you relieved to not have public participation in the project?
Let me answer that by saying this. I believed as a city councilor that Syracuse's destiny was not a shopping mall. I continue to believe that now.
Is there any, Mayor, is there any guarantee that under some future administration, they don't come back and try to seek SIDA's approval?
I can't speak to.
So there's
any
nothing that,
future- No, of course not. Of
Okay.
course, it's a free country, and I'm not the only one who says that.
Steph, do you feel that the city was misled by this entire tax deal? I know you were a critic for many years on it. Is there a little bit of I told you so going on here? Do you feel that the developer pulled a fast one on the city?
Rick, I'm going to answer that by saying that the things that I said as a city councilor, I feel still equally as strongly about now. But I'm a mayor now, and there's a different set of responsibilities. And so you can't, as all of us, but particularly as mayors, you can't change the past, you can only move forward. And again, I believe that the destiny of Syracuse was not a shopping mall then, and I believe it equally and more strongly now.
Is there any belief that, as you said, it's becoming a performing asset with the arrival of various tenants? And by August, they expect to have a large number of tenants in place when they rebrand the mall. Is there any expectation on your part that the city's receipt of sales taxes will at least lessen the burden of not having property taxes on the property?
I think that that's so speculative, I couldn't answer that in good conscience.
But you do expect, you do expect some income from this mall.
I would expect more sales tax than all things being equal, I would expect more sales tax now than we had in January of 2010, because there'll be more businesses where people will buy things now than there were in January 2010. Again, all things being equal.
Mayor, how do you think the community should look at the visions, and it was always changing, of these wild, fantastic Disney World things compared to what we have and where we sit now, and perhaps we'll never move forward to? How should the community look at that and say that the city cut a deal and here's what we ended up with?
Look, I think that the community should look at it for exactly what happened, and I think that your role as the media, as a third estate, is to make sure that that open and transparent process happens.
Can you talk a little bit more about the pilot payments to the city from the mall expansion? You mentioned a 3.1 million figure. What?
That's not a pilot payment. I think we could call that, I think it's sometimes referred to as a fee. There is an interim annual pilot payment that amounts to about $4 million, 3.1 of which is to go to the city. It is paid in installments, and some has already been paid, but it would have expired in February of next year. And so we are going to be receiving less money than we would have, but again, that was always part of the agreement and always part of the risks that the agreement contemplated when it was made.
So 3.1 part of that for?
Correct. 3.1 to the city, it's 4, so the remaining would go to the county.
Okay. So, but that will end, they were going to pay that for this year.
And they have already paid some of that for.
Can you say how much?
I can't offhand.
But that's not going to continue?
Well, what I'm saying is that there's going to, that it's not going to continue as it would have had they not chosen to elect it to be the final phase. Let me end it at that.
Okay, just to be clear though, will there continue to be some type of a payment going forward, beyond now?
Look, there are payments going forward, as I said, related to some of the bonds, when the bonds were issued, and the upfront payments payments that continue to go to the city. So, Rick, it probably would be better if we sat down to go through some of those details, because the characterization, and when you talk about payments and pilot payments and bond payments and fees, is exceedingly important, because there can easily be miscommunications.
Would Destiny be able to say that they lived up to the agreement with the city in light of the fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, the original idea behind the expansion was for 800,000 square feet, and all the tax deals are tied to that?
Jim, I think you're going to have to ask Destiny what they think the commitments that they made to the community were, and what the commitments that they fulfilled.
Can we get a copy of the letter they sent to someone?
Yeah, we can. We'll get you a copy of that letter.
Just how would you characterize this whole turn of events? Is this the end of,
I think it's the end of the public participation process. If Destiny chooses to move forward with Phase 2 and Phase 3, they'll have to get private financing and move forward in a private venue. But the expansion will be performing, has tenants in it, it's no longer an empty shell. And so Phase 1 those obligations have been met, and now the public participation and the bonding and the benefits that they were able to get as a result of the agreements that they made are now ending, by and large.
We'll do one more question here, and then we'll be sticking around after as well, so.
If I could ask, what you see here now, this phase 1, is this the kind of tourism and net wealth generator that you expected from this project? Is this going to be drawing people in from out of town for overnight stays?
I think, Rick, that's a question that you should ask the community.
I'm sorry,
It's a
I know
big
you said
mall.
one more, but, Hiawatha Boulevard and different traffic patterns and a ramp over Hiawatha and the parking lots that are there, is the city still got to do stuff around there, or will be called on to do stuff, either construction or policing differently or things? Because there still are changes that we think are going to happen once the expansion really opens to accommodate parking and people and et cetera, regardless of how big a deal it ends up being.
Look, I think that you could say that for any street in the city, and that we will respond as the needs present themselves. Okay, thank you all.